Hello.
Hey, what's up? Am I coming through all right?
Sorry?
Am I coming through all right? Sometimes Discord messes up my mic.
Yeah. Do you want to cam up?
Oh, I prefer not to if that's all right.
Yeah, yeah, that's fine.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so I guess we were just here to discuss veganism and such. So I guess we can just start, I guess, if you want to tell me perhaps what your contentions are with veganism.
Sure. So my basic idea is that in a way vegans are bad people because instead of accomplishing being more humane toward animals, which I don't think is possible, vegans actually degrade humanity to the level of animals.
Okay. So when you say vegans are bad people, that's like fine with me. I'm not really interested in like your contentions with vegans as individuals, but more so with like veganism as a movement. So would your concerns then be that you think veganism as a movement is sort of bringing the value of humanity down to that of non-human animals?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay, well that's interesting to me because most vegans I know actually don't value humans and non-humans the same. So would you mind perhaps explaining why you get this impression from veganism?
Yeah, I don't think most vegans think that animals and humans are quantitatively in a sense the same as in the same on the hierarchy or the spectrum. But in a way, they see humans and animals as qualitatively the same. They think that basically the only difference between humans and animals is a level of intelligence or a level of complexity or a level of this or that. But ultimately, they put humans and animals on the same plane of being. And that's really what I find extremely dangerous.
Okay. I'm probably just gonna ask a lot of questions to clarify, just because I want to make sure I understand what you're saying. So, when you say that we put them on the same plane of being, what does that mean exactly?
Sure. They refuse to recognize the exceptionality of human beings as qualitatively different beings than animals. In other words, that humans are not for them, humans are just animals who are more intelligent and more this, more that, but there's no qualitative difference with animals, only a kind of spectrum.
Okay, I think my limitation when it comes to my understanding of philosophy might be becoming an issue here because I'm not sure what it means to say like qualitative differences.
Oh yeah, yeah, I'll explain that. So
Okay.
with a quantitative difference, um you basically have the same form but different quantities of that same form. So, for example, a quantitative difference can be height, right? Someone is taller than another person. That's a quantitative difference, right?
Mhm.
But
Sure.
width, when you introduce width, width is not just quantitatively different from height, it's qualitatively an entirely different thing itself with its own spectrum. So, does that make sense?
Um, I think I'm still failing to understand fully, but maybe I could just give you sort of my perspective on the idea of the value of like humans and non-humans, and then that might address your concerns if that's fine.
Okay.
All right, yeah, sure. So I don't actually value like humans and non-human animals equally. I would say I generally value humans more. But when it comes to something like veganism and the question of like whether we should be killing these animals for food, to me it now becomes a matter of, I don't value a cow as much as I value a human, but I value them both enough to not kill and eat them, right? And I can probably draw the analogy between maybe someone who values like their mom more than like a random stranger. You can value your mom more than a random stranger, but you can still value them both enough to not kill and eat them, right?
Yeah, and that's what I was talking about. So to me, that would be putting humans and animals on the same plane of being. You're not treating them the same way, but ultimately, um, of course, you prefer in the same way that your mother is a human, right? Of course, you prefer your mother over other human beings, but we are extending, or there is a pretense to extending humanity to animals such that while we might not treat cows the same way as humans, we're also going to ascribe to them some degree of so called sentience or consciousness and basically put this on the same spectrum. Not the same place on that spectrum, but the same spectrum as beings.
Right. Well, that's probably because humans and animals share certain properties, right? And I would say that the property of something like consciousness or sentience would be that. Although, like you were kind of alluding to earlier, I would certainly say that cows probably possess a lower level of sentience, but the actual property of having sentience would be something that's shared between them.
Um, this is where I would have to disagree. I think words like consciousness and sentience are extremely poorly defined.
Mhm. Yeah, no, I would agree. Those terms can be kind of difficult to fully
Um,
flesh out, but I can do my best, I guess. So when I think of sentience, to me, I consider what is it like to be that thing. So if I think to myself, what is it like to be a rock? Well, it's probably really nothing there. But if I think to myself, what is it like to be a cow? Then there are certainly like subjective experiences that are happening.
I think that's a kind of ironically, it's kind of an anthropocentric way of looking at animals. I don't think you can actually subjectively relate to animals. They're so radically different that I think
Mhm.
the only way you can relate to them is negatively. You can't actually put yourself in the shoes of a cow and interpret their feelings or their experiences. Even for animals, the animal that is probably closest to us, not in terms of similarity, but in terms of compatibility, which is a dog.
Mhm.
Obviously, chimpanzees are more similar, but dogs are way more compatible with us, our motion gestures. Even when comes to a dog, I don't think you can really intuit or interpret or really truly empathize with a dog. I think you can have an idea in your head of what the feeling or what the experience of the dog is, and oftentimes or sometimes that can be compatible with how the dog responds to that feedback. But ultimately, I think you are dealing with beings so fundamentally and radically different um,
Mhm.
that no kind of empathy is possible.
Yeah, so I would agree that like humans and animals are generally like so different in the sense that we can't really always fully understand kind of what's going on with them. But I think to me it's less about being able to understand what they're thinking and what they're feeling and things like that, and more so just being able to understand that they are thinking and feeling to some extent, even if we don't know exactly what it is. Like a cow might be thinking something, it might be feeling something. What exactly they're feeling, I probably couldn't tell you, although I could infer from their, their behaviors and things like that. So it's less about saying like, oh, I think I can properly empathize with a cow or a dog, and more so about saying even if I couldn't empathize with them, they're still experiencing reality subjectively, and so it seems reasonable to infer that they have sentience.
This is where I'd have to disagree. I don't believe that they're experiencing reality subjectively, and moreover, I don't think it's possible to understand animal experience at all. I don't think. I think when we say words like feeling, right? I think we tend to take for granted how much human baggage is associated even with a word like that. What does it really mean to feel? What does it really mean to experience? So on and so on. When
Right.
it comes to animal, I just think they're animals. I just believe there's an unbridgeable chasm
Mhm.
between them.
Just real quick, sorry, I'm, like, kind of keeping up with your chat a little bit, and some people were saying my mic
Just
suddenly got really loud, and so I don't know if that's, like, an issue, or if it's resolved at this point, but
it's not
it
an issue that I can hear, but I don't
okay.
know. Is it multiple people or?
Oh, they say it's fine now. Okay. Okay, we're probably good. Alright. So then are you just, like, not convinced of the sentience of other animals then? Is that kind of what the issue
Yeah,
is? Okay. Oh, that's interesting. So, what would you say it is then about human, or let me think of how to word this properly. So, when I think of like who is sentient, to me, I don't see any more reason to doubt the sentience of a cow than a human. Maybe someone could provide like a compelling argument. I just personally haven't heard it, right?
yeah.
So then when I hear you say that, kind of what I think is, well, what is it about cows and other animals that causes you to doubt their sentience, especially if you're not doubting it in the case of humans?
Sure. When we talk about words like sentience or consciousness, we're talking about a level of fundamental awareness, right? Some kind of awareness of something. Now, what is that something? It's not particular objects and things within our phenomenal vision. For example, It's not just grass, it's not just other animals, it's just not the other beings. When we use the word awareness or conscious, we're speaking about um, some kind of awareness of something more fundamental than any one particular object in the world. Or
Mhm.
and moreover, even the ability to consciously differentiate objects. And note, I'm not saying treat different objects differently, which animals clearly do, obviously, but to consciously differentiate them as objects, as discrete and intelligible objects. Um, this presupposes and requires a fundamental, more fundamental stream of awareness than what animals are capable of.
Mhm. Okay. So, I think it sounded like you were describing your idea of sentience there a little bit, right?
Yeah, and to give you a better
Okay.
idea, I think in the history of religion, the awareness of this thing, this fundamental being, religion gives description to it in the form of a divinity, of a god, right? If you're not religious, it's not actually necessary to say it's a god. Philosophers, specifically during the classical philosophers like Plato, um, would give a description to this. I don't know if it would be loaded to call it a being. They would call it the good, the form of forms, right? The good. Um, and then in Enlightenment philosophy, they might call it something like the absolute object, right? Or
Mhm.
Kant's uh, absolute object that gives coherence and structure to our reality. Um, so it seems very clear to me that the difference between humans and animals is possessing this fundamental, some kind of awareness of something more fundamental than uh, our immediate being.
Yeah, sure. I would actually agree that, of course, generally speaking, non-human animals have like a less complex form of cognition than humans. But to me, that just means that they're probably just less sentient. And to you, it sounds like you're making the claim that they're just like not sentient at all. Um,
Precisely. To me, it's not that they're less complex. It's that there's a qualitatively different, um, there's a qualitatively different uh, th- characteristic we're talking about. Human beings are aware of something animals cannot be aware of. Human beings are a form of being that is qualitatively different from animals.
mhm. Okay, so it sounds like perhaps we're operating under different meanings of the word sentience, right? Because if I just take like a few steps back and revisit like what I describe sentience as, I when I think of sentience, I just mean like what is it like to be that thing? Like if I was that individual, would I be experiencing the world subjectively? And it seems like you're operating under a different meaning where it infers some like sort of higher level of like self-awareness or something, I think.
No, I think we're talking about the same thing. It's just I'm
Oh,
giving
okay.
additional I'm giving an additional level of interpretation and detail to what it is I think we're talking about. But I understand which what you're proposing. To
Mhm.
me, animals, to say that animals have a subjective experience implies that the animal uh is a subject, right? In the first place, possesses a subjective experience and so on and so on. But I don't see how this assumption can be justified. A
Mhm.
subject, for example, is the addressee of another, whether that being is another human being or want to go into psychoanalysis, it's some kind of super ego or whatever. It is some kind of way in which we define our identity, our being in relation to another. I don't
Mhm.
see how animals can be capable of doing this.
Okay, so then you think, or I should ask you rather, phrase as a question, so it doesn't sound like I'm like attributing a position to you that you don't hold. So do you think then that like for any given non-human animal, like a dog or a cow or whatever, that they're not experiencing reality subjectively?
Not subjectively, no, I would not use the word subjectively. Whether they're
Okay.
experiencing reality.
Based.
Thank you, Party Chairman. Whether they're experiencing reality is a very ambiguous question. What does it mean? To be clear, I don't think that animals are idle objects. I think there is a difference between a rock and an animal, right? But
Mhm.
I would be very clear about pointing out that animal being is qualitatively unique. An animal's
Mhm.
being is qualitatively unique being. I recognize I'm not trying to put humans on a kind of divine like level in relation to animals. I think it's very clear we possess some kind of commonality, not fundamental commonality, but some kind of commonality with animals. Um, but I just think that we do have a unique humanity that makes us not the same as animals.
Mhm. I mean, yeah, I would agree that, collectively humans have characteristics that make them unique and set them apart from non-humans. Um, I'm trying to figure out, I guess, how to word my confusion properly. So just think for a second. So if we consider a dog then, um, would you agree that, like, dogs feel like or dogs can, like, suffer and feel pain, like, if you kick them, there'll be some, like, sort of negative physiological response to that, like, there'll be, like, a pain response to that.
I do believe that there would be a negative physiological response, but I don't think the experience of pain is the same as a negative physiological response. To me, pain, as far as I understand it, is actually a subjective experience and interpretation, not intellectual interpretation, obviously, a very visceral one, obviously, but it's some kind of interpretation of the physiological response. That is what's
Okay.
painful. What's painful isn't so much the direct physiological response, but the relationship between that response to our more fundamental awareness.
Okay, so you're saying that the pain stems from the relationship between, like, what's causing the pain, like, the external factors and the level of awareness that an individual has?
It's the experience of the physiological response. It's not just the physiological response itself.
Okay. Maybe I can word my question better. I feel like I probably was a
Yeah.
little bit vague. Sorry. So when we think of like ourselves, right? And if someone like stabs us with a knife, there's going to be this idea of pain there. Like we might not be able to like fully accurately describe it, but like if someone stabs me or someone stabs you, there will be something that we call pain. So would you like if someone stabbed a dog, would you think that there's like that same type of pain that goes on in the dog?
Yeah, let me clarify why I don't think it would be the same. So, when a
Mhm.
human being gets stabbed, there is a very clear and obvious disruption and distress at a physiological level. And we experience that distress and we call that experience pain. But we are not one and the same with that distress, if that makes sense. Like, it's not just that we're mechanically responding to distress. The pain comes from the fact that the distress is disrupting some kind of prior state of subjective harmony. This also is why pain is extremely subjective. People can develop pain tolerances, and pain varies across different individuals for reasons that couldn't possibly just be physiological differences. Now, whereas if one were to stab a dog, obviously that's an extremely deranged thing to do and attests to as some kind of psychological problem on part of the person. Because the reason they're stabbing a dog is because think of inflicting pain on humans. It reminds them of that. But the truth is that I don't believe the dog actually experiences pain. I think the dog exhibits a response to the pain, but does not. Sorry, exhibits a response to the distress created by the knife. but that's not the same as pain.
Okay, so it seems like you're maybe arguing that, like, if I were to stab a dog, for instance, the response we would see to that would more so just be like, just a response to like the external stimuli, and that we can't necessarily infer pain from that. Like maybe if I had a solar powered calculator and I brought it out into the lights and it like turned on, that it would just be responding to like the environment around it, but
No,
we can't necessarily.
I don't take a mechanical view, but I don't think it would be enough to infer pain. I do agree that it wouldn't be enough to infer pain, but I'm also not willing to take a mechanical view that it's like it's just like a robot, which basically input and output. It's probably somewhere in between, but it's not enough to be pain.
Okay.
So yeah, one of the ways I know people might have trouble understanding this. Pain is a feeling we experience sometimes without any clear physiological input. We experience pain at very abstract and incorporeal things. We experience pain maybe because we read a text message, someone broke your heart. You experience pain when someone betrayed you. You
Mhm.
experience pain when, uh, most of all, and this is something that is very clear to me that animals aren't capable of doing, you experience pain simply by virtue of a kind of existential anxiety. Experience pain that you feel your life is purposeless. So nothing, you're not even receiving any new stimuli by your external environment. You are just in pain by virtue of some kind of deeper existential position.
Mhm. Is it okay if I wanna ask you some questions just to flesh out or understand your position more, and I wanna make it clear I'm not trying to, like,
Yeah, yeah, sure.
reductio you? Okay, cool. Um, so if you kind of take this view on, like, the experience of, like, dogs and, like, their ability to feel pain or perhaps lack thereof, then, would you take an issue? Well, I'm assuming you would, like, take an issue if someone just wanted to, like, gather up a bunch of dogs and just, like, treat them horribly, like, beat them or whatever, right?
No, yeah, obviously, I would.
Yeah. Yeah. So then I'm wondering, like, what exactly in your mind, under your view, would characterize that action as being wrong if you sort of take this idea that we can't reasonably infer like pain or like sentience from dogs.
I think the intention itself would have to be incriminated. So, why it is that someone would want to do such a thing clearly attests to some kind of sickness or whatever. That's very clear to me. Um, why else would they want to do such a thing? But another thing too is that even exhibiting reckless disrespect for other life forms and other beings, to me, implies a kind of lack of awareness of the fact that this is an entirely different being. So to me, it's not just that I think animals are the same as robots, and if you want to get off on torturing them or fucking with them, go ahead and do it. And I wouldn't find that disturbing. It's more so the fact that this is an entirely different being, which we will never be able to understand. Um, and that torturing them and whatever just for fun exhibits a kind of fundamental disrespect for not only these other beings, but our own humanity, because after all, the line is not as thick. I mean,
Mhm.
there's a qualitative difference, but we are not gods. We come from somewhere as human beings.
Mhm.
So there's all sorts of reasons why I think it can be justified that people would be disturbed at torturing animals without having a problem with eating animals. It's
Oh
the
yeah, I
same
agree.
reason. Sorry to just one last thing. It's the same reason why animals will eat other animals, but obviously you will not find animals torturing other animals as a kind of display of hubris or sadism. So that's really
Mhm.
my position.
Okay, yeah. So it sounds like when we're talking about someone who just like wants to like torture a bunch of dogs for whatever reasons, like the thing that it sounds like concerns you is the sort of sick mindset behind this, like the like what would drive a person to do that. Um, is that like a like I guess the sort of malice behind the actions, I guess. Would that be like a fair way of
It's
viewing your
both.
position?
It's both the malice as well as what that malice attests to in the act, in the practice itself, which I think is a fundamentally uh, false perspective. I guess I would call it a false stance a human being would have toward nature. I think it exhibits a level of hubris that I think very easily, very easily amounts to a lack of humanity toward other human beings as well.
Mhm. Okay. So, like, I'm trying to think of maybe a situation in which we could potentially account for this. Like, if we had someone who was just, I guess, they were just going around kicking dogs, and let's say they weren't really like thinking about it. Like, maybe sometimes you like kick a leaf on the sidewalk or something. Let's just say that they were just sort of like mindlessly kicking dogs as they walked or whatever. And there wasn't any sort of thought process of like, oh, I want to inflict harm on these dogs. Inflicting harm on others makes me happy. Um, would you feel like you would take an issue with that, or would that maybe be permissible because we've sort of accounted for the like, I guess, malicious mindset behind it?
So you're saying someone is like kicking dogs? Why?
Oh, sorry if you can hear the traffic noise. I don't know if my mic is picking it up.
Yeah.
Like, they're just kind of, like, mindlessly doing it, like, they're not really thinking about it too much. Like, how sometimes you, like, kick a leaf or a rock on the sidewalk or whatever? Let's just say there were, like, dogs on the street and they were just sort of mindlessly doing it. Like, would you feel like you would take an issue with that?
I think instinctual is a loaded word, so I just want to use the common sense meaning of that here.
Mhm.
I think instinctually, right, from a common sense perspective, we don't really treat dogs or animals the same way as rocks. So I think if someone were to be doing that, they would be lacking a level of fundamental awareness that is that is very abnormal for a human being. If a person was just kicking dogs the same way they would kick a rock just mindlessly or whatever, going around doing that, they probably lack a level of awareness that's attests to an even deeper deficiency. You know, now if someone doesn't do that serially in the same way as rocks, but let's say a farmer gets annoyed at a dog and kicks the dog, so the dog leaves him alone or something, which is something that happens, by the way, very often in developing countries. I
Mhm.
don't really I wouldn't make anything of it. Like, it is what it is. I mean, they might even kick a person if they're annoying them, you know? So,
Mhm. Okay. So then your issue with that, like the hypothetical of like someone just sort of like mindlessly kicking dogs, no malintent behind it. It sounds like your concern wouldn't be with the dogs. I think I'm not trying to like straw man you. I'm just trying to make sure I understand. Sounds like your concern would be less with the dogs and more so like with whatever mental faculties or lack thereof are present in the person that would prompt them to do that.
I don't like drawing such a strict division between those two things because I think that the state of the person's mental faculties and their relation to the dog um are entwined. Those things are like I grant the dog is another being, right? So for someone to treat another being this way, um, obviously attests to some kind of issue with their mental facilities. But I reject this view and this stance toward nature and toward animals. So I don't want to draw a hard distinction, but I think if this is what you're asking, to be very clear, to me, a dog cannot have what we would call rights. A dog to me could not have rights. That doesn't mean people in practice will see fit to be sadistic toward dogs, but for no reason. But to me, a dog itself, I cannot understand a dog. But One of the things that I find important to point out is that it's precisely our distance toward dogs and our inability to understand them that I think can be a source of respect. We should derive our respect for animals not because of what we can know about them, but because of what we could never possibly know about them. Um, One of the things take issue with when it comes to vegans is that they overly familiarize the animal world. But I think there's a division there that cannot be bridged. But it's also a division that should inspire a level of respect.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I guess I'm still trying to figure out, or I guess I'm still trying to understand, like, what exactly your issue would be in the case of like kicking the dogs mindlessly. Because I get that it has to do with like what would I guess drive a person to do that, but I think beyond that I'm getting a little bit lost. So maybe if you
Yeah,
could just try
I
and.
just I would be disturbed by it because I would reject that behavior.
Hmm.
I would
Yeah.
consider
Well.
that behavior something inhuman. Let's consider it inhuman behavior, but I would not put myself in the shoes of the dog. I don't think I could do that.
Hmm. Okay, so there are a couple of things that were interesting there. So you say you would reject the behavior because it's inhuman, and when you say inhuman, are you just meaning to say that it like deviates from like how humans generally act?
Both how humans generally act and what I believe our humanity means at a more fundamental level. And what our humanity means to me at a more fundamental level is a level of awareness for the kind of abyss of others, the fact that we cannot actually reach others at a certain level.
Hmm. Okay, I think I'd like to return to that point, but I'm also interested because you said that you wouldn't put yourself in the place of the dog, and I was kind of wondering why that is.
Because I don't believe it could ever be possible for me to relate to a dog.
Oh, okay. Oh, okay. So it doesn't have like anything to do with like a concern with how like the dog, like any sort of pain response that the dog would have.
No,
Okay.
no. If I started to put myself in the shoes of animals, I would have a lot to account for because animals are just different. They behave in ways that don't make sense to human beings.
Hmm. Okay. So then, I guess just to reiterate, if someone said, "Well, would you put yourself in the position of that dog?" You would say no. If they say why, you would just say because you just don't understand dogs, and that would be why. You like can't empathize with them.
Yeah, dogs are fundamentally different creatures, and there's no way for me to relate to
Hmm.
them.
Okay. Well, I took note of something. Oh no, where did my thing go? Here it is. So when we were talking about the other point, and you were saying like it's inhuman to behave this way towards dogs, you said that what you meant by that is that it deviates from how humans generally act, and also what our humanity means at a fundamental level. So what does it mean when you say that? Like what does it mean to deviate from what humanity means at a fundamental level?
Sure. It's a complex question. Um, to deviate from that would be to act in such a way that betrays um what human beings are fundamentally. And to me, what humans are fundamentally um cannot really be neatly defined so much as it is something that we participate in. I can give you the reasons why I think it would deviate from what it means to be human, but
Mhm.
the precise content of what it means to be human, I think, is a specific dialectic. That, by the way, the word dialectic, if I have to explain that, I can explain. It's a specific dialectic between being and the way in which being uh, discloses itself to us, opens itself up to our experience.
Okay. So it sounds like you kind of have this maybe this idea of like humans and how they like sort of intrinsically act and like the things that they tend to value and things like that. And so there's like someone who decides to just go around mindlessly kicking dogs is behaving in a way that goes against that, perhaps.
Yeah, but I also want to point out I'm not trying to isolate specific values and say these values are for their own reasons fundamentally human. I think that we can explain the actual values we have across cultures in terms of our humanity.
Mhm.
What and how they relate to our humanity has to be determinate. So I'm not trying to prescribe like this is what human means, and I impose this upon every particular human being in the world. I think we can discern the form, the fundamental form of humanity through the particular differences that manifest themselves between different human cultures, civilizations.
Okay. So then I guess when we're looking at like how you might consider how we should treat other animals, it sounds like you believe we should treat them in a way that is in alignment with how like humanity fundamentally is. Um
Well, it's tough to say that because that would imply that we're not already doing that. Like we have not already been doing that.
oh no, I mean I think you can both hold the position that like we currently are treating animals in alignment with how humanity fundamentally acts and also that if we weren't doing that then it would be bad, right?
Um, I suppose, but I want to be clear that when I say we should not treat animals in a way that fundamentally does not align with our humanity, the content of what our humanity is determinate and not prescribed um, prescriptively from the top down universally.
Mhm. Sure. So like you have like this idea of like there's like certain descriptive claims we can make about I guess the fundamental nature of humanity and that if we were to act in ways that were outside of that towards like other animals, then it seems like that's sort of where you would have an issue with people's behavior as it pertains
I
to
think
how we treat other
I'd be
animals.
better comfortable saying where people act in ways that differ from our fundamental humanity. Not only am I saying we should condemn this, but that we do condemn this.
Um I think sorry, I think I'm a little bit confused with that. Could you maybe explain it? I'm getting
Sure,
lost,
yeah,
sorry.
I'm not creating like a moral precept that I'm trying to apply to universally. I'm saying, for example, I'll make it more a little bit more clear. Each culture has a specific cultural and traditional relationship to animals, how they relate to animals.
Mhm.
Um, when people um, deviate from that so fundamentally, people find this disturbing.
Mhm. Okay.
So it's
So
not that
mm,
so each culture has a specific way of relating to the animal world. No culture sees animals the same way they see rocks, but
mhm,
um, so it's almost like there's a finite way in which different cultures relate to animals, and when people fundamentally deviate from that, when people transgress the line each culture establishes between ourselves and animals, that kind of chasm, I mean, it's we tend to experience this as something disturbing. It is disturbing.
mhm. Okay, so it sounds like you're also when you said, like, it depends on, like, where this is happening, I guess it sounds like you're giving consideration to, like, the different cultural practices of people.
Yeah.
Um, okay, yeah, that makes sense. So then oops. So then if we had, like, there are cultures that engage in, like, all practices that you and I would probably agree are horrific. And I'm sure that this extends to their treatment of like other animals as well. Like there are some cultures who have um, practices where I think they take like a goose and they feed it, or they just give the goose like a ton of alcohol and then they take it by the neck and swing it around and stuff like that. It's like a marriage ceremony. But like to those people, that would be like a totally normal cultural
Yeah,
practice. So would
I
that be something that you'd be fine with?
absolutely. Yes. I think
Okay.
to me this is definitely really human. It's not some kind of arbitrary sadistic act. It's a determinate tradition that has the weight of the humanity of all of those people, the meaning of their humanity behind it. So I have
Mhm.
no problem with this kind of cultural practice of banging the goose around. But I would also
Mhm.
predict that probably it would become less popular.
Mhm.
It would probably be something that becomes less popular, but I have no issue with it. I don't have any issue with it.
Okay. And, if there was, like, a culture then where perhaps their marriage ceremony involved, like, taking a dog and skinning the dog alive, would that also be something that you're fine with, or would you maybe, like,
Absolutely
have other
fine with it.
consideration?
No, no, I would be fine with
Oh,
it.
okay.
Absolutely.
Okay. So it sounds like your idea of, like, what it means to act in alignment with, like, fundamental humanity gives a lot of consideration to cultural practices of people, and, like, if these cultural practices, express some sort of, like, fundamental nature of humans, then it seems like you're fine with it.
Of
I
course.
hope.
So for the example you just gave, like the skinning the dog, right?
Mhm,
Now, if this is a true cultural practice, it's a real tradition that they're doing. First of all, it's a very old one. It's one that has passed not only the test of time, but in a sense, the test of being. It has a kind of metaphysical depth that requires a lot of care and a lot of thought to truly understand. There is a level of metaphysical wealth. Now, is that the same as like some guy randomly skinning a dog for no reason because they want to inflict pain on it and it's funny? No, if it's a cultural practice, then this has a meaning for this culture that
mhm,
somehow fits within their wider expression of humanity.
mhm. Okay, and, I'm assuming that, like, if we think of cultural practices that tend to, like, victimize humans as opposed to non-humans, presumably I assume you have, like, different standards for humans and non-humans that would, you know, warrant condemning it in the case of, like, I don't know, female genital mutilation or something like that. Or would you actually be fine with it in the case of humans as well?
Well, let me be very careful here, just because it's
Mhm,
really easy to misinterpret. So,
mhm,
would I be fine with it? If you mean would it disturb me greatly? Yes, it would disturb me a lot. But
mhm,
would I call for America to invade this culture and teach them the correct way? No. I am
mhm,
the way so I am a humanist, right? But I'm not a humanist from the perspective of European universalism. My form of humanism is confident that through the particular development of this culture itself, that the inhuman uh, manner by which human beings are treated, and let's be clear, obviously, human beings have been humanity. I mean, if you want to look at it in a Marxist way, there is a fundamental alienation between ourselves and our humanity that spans thousands and thousands and thousands of years. But I'm confident that humanity will prevail. I'm confident that through the determinate development of this culture itself, internally, that such practices would be eliminated.
mhm. Yeah, okay, I think I get you, like, there can sometimes be a distinction between, like, what we personally
Yeah.
feel averse to and,
So
like, what we actually find
and
immoral,
and
right?
to elaborate, I do no, to be clear, I do find it immoral,
Oh,
but
okay.
I don't think there's a universal morality with which to impose. I find
Mhm,
it immoral for me is almost a prediction. It's a prediction that eventually they will awaken to the reality of its immorality. But to be clear, when we're dealing with human beings, whether you want to talk about certain horrible things like what you mentioned, or slavery, which is probably the best example, the one that for me is the easiest to talk about because it is like the history of humanity. When we encounter different cultures, that's what happens, slavery, right? So, in the case of slavery, And this is true for all forms of slavery in the history of mankind, especially the ones that preceded the transatlantic slave trade, which is a qualitatively different one. Upon a group or a population being enslaved, some kind of historical dialectic is initiated that is double sided. So it's not just that empathetic and compassionate people say, we should not be treating these people this way. It's that the people who are the victim of the slavery, they are engaged in a dialectic with the people enslaving them. They resist, not directly, but in a sense, they resist this. They initiate a change in the meaning of general humanity. And so there's an actual active development that the slaves themselves participate in that leads to a new outcome. With animals, this isn't the case. We have been treating animals the same way for forever almost, right? If we define treating animals the same as like being cruel and not human, not treating them as humans, I mean, and eating them and whatever. Animals have never initiated a dialectic, a genuine dialectic, a real response to this. They
Mm,
have never
Um,
endangered a
sorry.
historical change because of
At this
them.
point, I think sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, but at this point, I think it might be beneficial for you to like, explain to me what dialectic means in this context. I just wanna
Okay,
make sure I
yeah,
follow.
excellent. So
Mhm.
dialectic is referring to um, opposites. So the idea of dialectic is that um, one perspective, right, is finite and limited. And by opening one to the perspective of another, namely one that is opposite to you, you can arrive at a deeper insight, a more holistic, general, deeper insight. So, for example, the Platonic dialogue in Greek philosophy, Plato is creating characters and he sets these characters up to be arguing with each other, right? So, one guy says one thing and the other guy says another thing. And in this way, a conversation is initiated that allows Plato to arrive at a deeper truth. So instead of just having one perspective, there's another perspective. So beyond the dialogical form of dialectic, like through dialogue, in history, the idea of dialectics is that forms, cultures, societies, states um, possess a relationship with their opposite, their real opposites, their real material premises, right? Which relate to them in the form of opposites. And so there's this kind of tit for tat and back and forth between the two that leads to some kind of new outcome. So in the case of the slave example, it's the relationship between master and slave that is not just a one sided relationship, but it's two. So the slave has an input and the master also has an input. It's not just that the master is the only one who defines the relationship. So this is what the dialectic means.
Okay, and you're saying that animals can't have that sort of input?
Yeah, they do not participate in a historical dialectic with human beings that changes history, leads to new cultures, societies, and civilizations.
Mhm. Okay, so it sounds like maybe the point to take away from here is, like, in the case of, like, master and slave, like, the slaves have this potential to actually, I guess, make some sort of, like, tangible impact on history with respect to, like, cultures and society, whereas that's not the case with animals then.
Yeah, precisely.
Okay. Sorry, I'm just trying to think of how to, like, properly form my my question. Sometimes I struggle with that. Um, so I'm assuming that, like, if there were some sort of, like, well, I get well, okay. If there was, like, some way, like how do I word this? I'm so sorry, I'm struggling. So, there certainly exist humans that can't, like, create societies and cultures, like, there exist humans that have, like, the level of, like, cognition or capacity or intelligence, whatever, of the animals whom we farm. But I'm assuming that like if it were a case where we were just like mass enslaving these humans that couldn't fight back any more than animals could and didn't have the potential to um, change society and culture any more than animals could. I mean, I'm assuming that you would still extend moral consideration to them and say that we still shouldn't enslave them. Mhm.
Yeah, I just take issue with the premise. So to me,
Okay.
the I am a kind of Eastern humanist. To me, human being is not defined by the individual unit. Human being is defined by collectively. Human being is defined by the culture, the society, the tradition. And there's no society, there's no culture, and there's no civilization, whether it's a small tribe of hunter gatherers or it's the Aztecs or it's some kind of civilization we have now. There is no civilization uh, in which human beings are incapable of history. Every real human being belongs to some kind of society. Now, they may leave that society and go live in the woods, but ultimately, this is the nature of human beings. There's no, even in the Amazon, where people are living in the jungle, they have a real historical being. They have a level of, they are just as so-called complex as us. It's just that they manifest that complexity in different ways.
Mhm.
So to me, there is no human society that is at the level of animals. And now there are individual human beings that can be born with defects that prevent them from interacting, participating to the full extent of most human beings. But they belong to the human society. They come from a human being. They're born of a mother. They come from a family. And
Mhm.
we, as human beings, do not treat them the same as animals because we recognize the contingency that the difference between us being born in that way and them being born, sorry, in that way and the way we were born, more privileged, is a contingent difference that is completely unknown to us. So we cannot treat them as human beings, even though they are unable to manifest the full extent of humanity. And besides, no one human being can manifest the full extent of its humanity. Human beings are collective and social. We have different skills and abilities and traits, but it's the unity and relationships between us that define our humanity.
Okay, so it sounds like maybe then you're not just giving consideration to like the capacity or I shouldn't say capacity, like the capabilities of like the specific individuals, but also like whether they come from a species that possesses these capabilities as well.
No, no, because if you just judge it based on capabilities, one, it's a kind of individualistic human, right? You measure them in individualistic. Two, it's kind of like this arbitrary utilitarian view of beings and human beings, like, oh, what can they do?
Oh,
Uh,
sorry. Just to clarify, when I say capabilities, I'm talking about like the capability to have the impact on history that you were referring to earlier in terms of like changing society and culture, and things like that.
it's not so much that I want to define abilities and capabilities as much as I want to say what actual relation do they possess to our humanity? Um, Defining that in terms of an ability is too difficult. Um, of course, if they are capable of participating in history, so on and so on, this is an indication of what their fundamental relationship to humanity is. But it's not simply a matter of ability.
Okay, so maybe it's less about them belonging to a species that possesses the sort of traits that you value, more so just what their relationship to that species is. So like the humans in question that I like proposed earlier who were like mentally who had like the cognition level and such of a cow and we were like, well, what if these were the slaves instead of like the humans who were slaves? And you said, well, you still take issue with that. It sounds like the reason you would take issue with that would be because of the relationship they have to, like, humanity generally, maybe.
Well, it's kind of a new question. So basically, what you're asking is like, let's say we took all of the disabled people of our society and just enslave them, basically.
Yeah, I guess that's one way that's one way of looking at it. I'm just trying to sorry,
Yeah.
I'm gonna clarify. I know this is kind of
No, 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 I
like
understand.
a
It's a hypothetical. So
yeah, yeah, I'm just trying to make sure I
the
understand.
problem I would have with that is that these disabled people come from a family. You know, the way in which human beings are born is not that they're born and then it's up to some kind of abstractly derived, universally applicable moral system how they're treated. Human beings are born in families. They're born in a determinate way. Their sociality is determinate. So I don't see how a society could just enslave all disabled people. It doesn't seem possible to me. Like all disabled people would be enslaved. Moreover, and here's the funny thing, I don't think they could be enslaved. Maybe a better example would be eaten, right? Would they be eaten? All of them eaten. Would that be a better
Mhm.
example? Because to be enslaved, you have to only, Immanuel Kant, the philosopher, said, actually, ironically, a human being is the only animal that requires a master. So only human beings can be enslaved. A cow can be contained and eaten, but ultimately cannot be enslaved.
Okay, so then if we like kind of go back to the hypothetical and why you would take issue with like enslaving mentally disabled people, it sounded like the main reason would be that their relationship socially to humanity is sort of already determined by virtue of the fact that they are like born from humans into a human society and that they are humans.
More or less, but it's also that they couldn't be enslaved if they lacked what it means to be fundamentally human at an individual level. They could be eaten, maybe. That would be a better example
Mhm.
because it would be possible, but couldn't be enslaved.
Okay, maybe it'd be better to go with the eating hypothetical
Yeah.
then, like, if we were
That
yeah.
that that would
So
also be better too. Yeah. I've
mhm,
never heard of a society in which all uh, so-called disabled people are eaten. I don't even know how you would measure that. Like,
mhm,
because again, societies don't treat every single individual as an individual. They treat someone as a human being and just assume a lot. Um,
mhm.
like no society just goes door to door asking like, okay, is there a Turing test we can take and see if you're human? That's just not how it works. Um, So I would, i- of course, we know there are societies that have engaged in things like human sacrifice and so on and so on. But these are endowed with meaning. They have some kind of meaning for this society, which is very complicated, complex. So a society that is eating disabled people would be very bizarre to me. I don't know how they would measure that. I'd be interested in knowing how they would be able to measure that. And the second thing is, I would at the level of my Eastern humanism, right? I would say that this is well, and I'm vindicated by actual cultures and societies. So in most cultures and societies, the reason why this is such a disturbing thing to do is again, this people you are eating, right? Are coming from us. They are have a mother. The the difference between us being born this way and them being born this way is purely contingent.
Mhm.
Um,
So then if,
they're
like,
too
kind of
close. They're too close to us, right? They are us in a way. It's just that there's some contingent reason they were not able to fully become what they, in a sense, are. They were not able to fully realize what is very clearly, um, what they clearly had maybe the potential to be. Like they have the structure of a man, they have the form of a man or a human. Sorry, uh, which basically means only a small contingent difference separates us from them.
mhm. Okay, so then I mean, initially, I was going to ask you, like, if, like, all of these people sort of just, popped into existence and weren't necessarily born from everyone, if that would change your view at all, but it sounds like you're also kind of giving consideration to things like will they look like a person as well, so that so they have like they possess certain abilities of humans as well?
Um, of course. I mean, so these people would just pop into existence, not belonging to any society, right? Just pop into
Um,
existence, and
Well, so they would be kind of like the humans that we were already talking about, like the humans who are cognitively impaired. And previously we were saying that they were born from other humans, and so now I'm wondering, like, if we took these same humans, but the only difference we made is that perhaps they just like popped into existence for whatever reason, but in all other
yeah.
respects they're the same, whether that would change your view at all.
Uh, it would, but I also think this would have profound consequences for any civilization. I mean, you're talking about. I think a new religion would emerge around this. I think new cults, not in the modern sense, but the ancient sense, new view of metaphysics, some kind of fundamentally new way of relating to being would emerge as a result. Like, how would people make sense of this? Is probably a more important question. How would they make sense of that? I don't
Mhm.
think the first thing that would come to people's mind is let's eat them.
Mhm. Right. Okay, so it sounds like your concerns then would be mostly for like the externalities of that. Like how would this impact how society generally views, I don't know, maybe each other, or
Yeah.
ethics in general?
Yeah, see,
Okay.
I can entertain hypotheticals, but the issue with posing hypotheticals in a vacuum is that it's kind of like elevating. It's like arbitrary. Like, why wouldn't this have consequences for other things too, right? You can't just
Mm,
isolate one difference. It's hypothetical and say
mm.
everything would be the same except for this. Of course, the universe we live in is more connected, interconnected. than That
Sure. Like I think we can certainly account for things like that in hypotheticals, although I agree that there can be a difference between like what if this happened hypothetically and what if this happened in the real world? Because if something happens in the real world, there are pragmatic concerns to take into consideration. Um, but
right,
like
but
I guess Mhm.
yeah, but if the hypothetical is still another version of our world, there would obviously be consequences for the difference posed in the hypothetical that are not accounted for in the hypothetical itself within the range of the.
Okay. Um, so then I'd be interested then if your concern is mostly with like the externalities of this, like how would this affect human or like human society at large? I mean, we perhaps we can just account for that. We could say like hypothetically, we could just say that once we start enslaving these humans, that there is no really difference made with respect to how we view other people.
No, no,
Um,
I think it would provoke a profound existential confrontation with our own humanity. And I don't think it would be possible to eat. I just don't. I think we would not eat them. I think I personally, right, if we're speaking for me, so we're not, so let's just go from the is that I'm talking about to the ought. Me personally, I would be uncomfortable eating them because it would provoke a radically different view of my own humanity. We are dealing with a situation where people are popping into existence from thin air. It would radically provoke confrontation with my own humanity, the real consequences for which I could not predict. But I would not
mhm,
be I would not be comfortable eating. I wouldn't even be comfortable taking a picture. It would almost like be this is a sacred object, you know. I couldn't
mhm,
even be comfortable making fun of it or whatever, right? Like is this from God or something? I mean, it'd be a
mhm.
very scary thing that I don't think people would play around with.
Yeah. Well, to me, it sounds a bit like your concerns with that would be like the pragmatic application of like this sort of enslavement. And right now, I'm mostly interested in sort of exploring this just perhaps in a vacuum where we can, talk about it in terms of hypotheticals and account for those sorts of concerns. Because I would agree
Yeah,
with you. Like if this was happening in real life, like absolutely, that would
yeah.
have consequences
Well,
on how we see each
one of the
other.
reasons it would be hard to deal with that hypothetical is because I think there's a deeper rationality to the world. There's a deeper reason for why the world is the way it is, as it is now. I don't think the world is arbitrary. So it's really hard to entertain that question. But I think if you could account for all of those considerations, which I think is an impossibility, even then, by virtue of the fact that barely anything separates us from them, I don't think we would treat them the same way as animals. I just don't.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, I would agree that we probably wouldn't do it, although I'm mostly interested in whether it would be, like, morally permissible to do so.
What do you mean
Like, if
morally?
we
Yeah, it's kind of a tough. Right, like, what do you mean morally permissible?
like, just if you would take a moral issue with it, if you would look at that and say, "Oh, yeah, that's immoral, I don't like that, they shouldn't be doing it."
So for me, I'm not a prescriptive moral universalist. So I don't actually think morality works in the sense of we individually determine what is moral and what is not moral. I think morality is a functional and kind of objective reality. So to me, it's not really a question of what I would morally prescribe as much as what would be my morality. Not because I determined it as such because of some kind of logical consistency, but because of my more fundamental embeddedness within being and the consequences of. So for me, I think it would be immoral. It would be immoral, but not from the perspective of a moral universalism. So, for example, it's very easy for me to say that if uh, someone accidentally killed one of these people, it would not be as big of a deal as if they accidentally killed a human being.
Mhm. Right, okay. So then I guess if we sort of revisit the question of sorry, it's just like
Mm.
morality debates always make me laugh because of the hypotheticals we get into. But anyway, if we revisit the question of like eating these sort of cognitively impaired individuals, um, that we said possess no ability or any future ability to ever like impact the history of humanity, they can never like impact society or culture. And if we
Yeah.
also say that like in eating these individuals, there will be no like consequences with respect to how we like treat other humans who aren't these individuals. Would you have any sort of issue with eating them at that point?
Yes, because again, I don't think I think this is a kind of maybe Western view of humanity. Humanity is at the level of the individual human being. To me, human being is a human being really must encompass the kind of collective organism, right? So to me, we cannot just treat humans or human organism as a individual unit from a moral perspective. So from my moral perspective, we must treat it at the level of the consequences it would have for all humanity, insofar as humanity has a determinate embeddedness in a state, civilization, or society.
Hmm. Okay, to me, perhaps I'm just not understanding, but that sounds still like a concern with how eating these animals would impact how humanity interacts with each other at large, or is there something else that I'm missing?
Do I think there is? Well, I think that's true for everything.
Right. I'm trying to tease
Yeah,
out
I
like
think,
what
for
the issue would be.
example, ultimately we cannot again. So I want to be clear. To me, the reason why human beings possess the relations they do with one another, define these as human, is not because of what we derive positively, but about other human beings, but because of the radical distance between us. For me, a human being is basically another being for which, with which you, as an individual, possess an unbridgeable chasm. But it is also a being that reciprocates some kind of awareness, uh, respect, and reality of that chasm itself. So it's almost like when you look another person in the eyes, you're both looking at kind of the abyss of one and another's otherness. And this is
Mhm.
what the kind of elementary human
Infra
recognition.
8
Thank you,
SUNGORILLA.
Degenerate. Appreciate it. Sorry, it was a sub. This to
It's
me is the
okay.
most fundamental kind of human mutual recognition. Um, but
Mhm.
so if we go from, for example, from philosophy, the Enlightenment, Hegel, this is also how we make sense of things like the state. It's how we make sense of things like common civilization. It's why, to me, the human being is not just an individual. A human being is part of a more fundamental reality.
Okay. Okay, so, it sounds
So,
like
so to me, to
Mhm.
get kind of, I'm just saying this because it sounds like your question is like, is there something fundamental, fundamentally intrinsic about this this hypothetical cognitively impaired thing coming from thin air? Is there something intrinsic about it that makes treating it badly wrong? I say no, but it's also true for humanity itself as well. It's also true for normal human beings. We don't The reason why we have a respect for other human beings is not because we derive some kind of intelligible essence that makes them human, but precisely because of the mutual lack of understanding, lack of understanding the essence of the other.
Mhm. Okay. So then, like, if we look at how this pertains to the hypothetical we were exploring, then if we had like these humans who are cognitively impaired, they popped into existence, um, and if eating them wouldn't actually have any sort of impact on humanity and how we treat each other and how our society and cultures will advance, it sounds like you would still take issue with eating them due to like just, I guess, their essence of humanity that they would still possess in
So
things like the.
to,
Mhm.
to be clear, when I mentioned this stuff about history, that I wasn't saying prescriptively that this is a litmus test. If you can participate in history, that is how we will define your humanity. It was more descriptive that this is a real difference between humans and animals. Um, it doesn't mean that it's a Turing test with which to subject every possible human being. Because obviously, what human being can individually determine history? Human being can't do that by themselves. It's a collective and social process.
Mhm.
But
Yeah.
humans, more or less, and it's obviously on a spectrum when it comes to humanity, participate in this. Uh, and humanity, in the abstract, is not so much a set of positive and intelligible qualities that we subject people to the evaluation of, like a Turing test. Humanity is a kind of benefit of the doubt that we afford to human beings,
Mhm.
um, which is why it's in the abstract.
Right.
We
So
don't
these there's
really, yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, so they still possess, like, some level of, like, humanity such that you would still say that we shouldn't, like, kill and eat them then, it sounds like.
Well, yes, obviously. I mean, like, what other
Mhm.
reason would they look exactly like human beings? Why else would they? Why
Oh,
else
yeah.
would they possess our anatomical structure and look like us? And basically, there would be
Mm.
no difference between us except the thing that's relevant for the purposes of the hypothetical, which is lacking some kind of ability to act as human beings.
Yeah, to be
Um,
clear, I would definitely agree that these individuals are, like, human-like, right? And that we shouldn't like, there's multiple reasons I would say we shouldn't kill them. The only reason I asked that question is because I'm just trying to make sure I understand exactly what your contention would be with eating them. But, now I know that it's humanity. Um, so I have, so then, if your hesitation then is being informed by the fact that these individuals are still, like, human-like and still possess some level of humanity, then I guess that kind of means that it would be worth it to flesh out the concept of humanity at that point. Um, so typically, when I'm trying to understand what is informing people's idea of humanity, I like to ask them, if we had a human who was born with like the mind that functioned the same way as like a cow mind, and it was at the similar or the same level of like cognition, intelligence, sentience, whatever, all of that. Presumably, most people would be fine with, or wouldn't be fine with killing and eating that individual. And I mean, I'm assuming you take that view as well.
Well, again, there's two things that I think are wrong with this approach. The first one is what I pointed out earlier, is that this is a greedy hypothetical. There's a deeper reason why the world is the way it is. There's a reason why cows have the minds they do and look the way they are. And there's a reason why human beings look different and also have different minds. It's not an arbitrary difference. There's actually a reason for that. So we can't actually isolate one. We can't have our cake and eat it too. So I think my position, firm position, is that there is a deeper rationality to the world. Therefore, such hypotheticals could not even be entertained in a meaningful way. The second issue is that there is a fundamental difference here, I think, between it's a is and ought problem. So morality, as insofar as it is a functional reality, is not actually premised by the reasoning we give for it. What I mean by that is that people have the morality they do, not because it's premised by the reflexivity of moral thinking, but because it's an actual, real, and objective reality. Like, people do not premise their morality by means of reflexive contemplation of morality. And you have to bear that difference in mind, because given that, it would then shift the burden of explanation upon the person who wants to eat this hypothetical person. Like, so functionally speaking, this person reminds us of a human being. They feel like a human being. That would be their cultural connotation, culturally, right? So if a person were to eat them, they would be making a definitive statement with regard to this culture. They would be making a statement positively. It's not just that, oh, this person's going to eat them and then we have to evaluate the consequences subjectively. They would already be saying something by doing that. They would already be making a statement. Like, the statement they would say would be, for example, I have a callous disregard for human common sense. I have a callous disregard for people's sensibilities. And if they have such a callous disregard for those sensibilities, what else would they have a disregard for, right? So the same system, I don't know if you call it that, the same kind of reason we have sensibility that makes us disgusted by eating this hypothetical person is the same reality, the same content of why we disgusted when someone rapes or kills and so on and so on. It's not like you can just be an antisocial psychopath only for one thing and then it won't have consequences for how you relate to our general human moral values in whatever given society. So, in short, there are deep flaws to this question. And it's the basic assumption is that morality is something premised by its reflexive contemplation, which is just not the case. And like, we can talk about whether we subjectively feel as though the morals that actually exist are fair or consistent. But those morals still exist. We can complain about them all we want, but I take a Hegelian view according to which the development of human morality does not result from reflexively determining what is or is not moral based on some abstract criterion, but through an imminent development of morality as an objective reality.
Okay. So then if we go back to sort of the first contention you took with the hypothetical, was this idea that it can't be entertained because, like, humans have human minds for a reason and cows have cow minds for a reason, and I think depending what we mean by that, I might actually agree. But if we're talking about, like, just, in terms of a hypothetical, it seems like that would, bringing that concern in would just be a form of like pragmatic shielding because I don't think we necessarily have to account for like how the hypothetical could exist, like whether the hypothetical could be like physically possible because like there's some factor in our world that determines why cows have a cow mind. Um, because to me, usually I take the view that if you're rejecting a hypothetical, usually it should be done on at least one of 2 grounds. Either A, the hypothetical entails, like, a logical contradiction, or B, the hypothetical is irrelevant. Because it
Yeah.
seems like your concern with the hypothetical is more so pragmatic.
Well, I'll actually explain it to you. So within your hypothetical, you have arbitrarily isolated a single quality, right? That does not seem to fit within the scheme of this world's rational being. Because of that, you are basically creating a kind of theology within your hypothetical. This one exception of it's a human being, but it has the mind of a cow, right? This one exception is a god. You're basically creating a god that exists only for its own sake, does not exist for a reason. It would not have consequences for the rest of being, and self-subsistent and exists in a vacuum. So it's kind of like you're creating this god. And be honest with you, the only way I could entertain your hypothetical is by saying we would have to worship this cow mind human body because it is God. It's the only thing within this hypothetical universe that is an exception to the deeper rationality of the world. It would be God.
Mhm. Okay. So you're saying that, like, if there were a human born with, like, a cow mind, basically, that we should just worship them as a god. And then I guess my follow-up question would be, like, if we took a cow, like, just any normal cow that was born, and let's say that this cow had a mind that was identical to that of the human we've just described, presumably you would take a different view with the cow, right?
How would you deter? Would the cow, if the cow has the same mind as a human, it would have to manifest that fact in some kind of observable way, wouldn't it?
What do you mean?
Like, for example, it would have to interact with human beings in such a way that proves this.
Well, we're just saying well, it's effectively a cow born with a cow mind, right? Because if we said that the human previously was born with a cow mind, then the identical mind in the cow body would be a cow
So,
mind.
so basically, like the cow it would act the same way any other cow would act, but secretly it has the mind of a human.
Well, I guess it depends on how you're defining human minds. It's functionally similar, or identical rather, I should say, to
What would be
the
the phenomenal implications of that? And what I mean by that is like how, first of all, would we be able to? Is there a way of observing that beyond magically knowing?
no, not really, but I don't think we like
Okay,
in this
so
hypothetical,
yeah,
we
yeah, it would be a cow, and it acts the same way. It's not doing anything out of the ordinary as far as cows are concerned, but it has the mind of a human.
well, it has the mind of a cow, and the human before had the mind of also of a cow, right? Because we said that when this human was born, they were born with the mind of a cow.
So wait, so this is just a cow then? It's not a cow with a human
Yeah,
mind.
yeah, it's basically a
Oh,
cow.
it's just a cow. Well,
Yeah,
what about the
basically.
cow?
Yeah, well, you're saying that, like obviously you take the view that it's, like, fine to kill them, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so, like, the reason why that comes across as a bit odd to me is because we're basically talking about 2 individuals that have the same mind but different bodies, so it kind of comes across as a shell morality position almost because in
Well,
the case of the one oh, yeah, sorry?
well, one is a god and the other one is just a cow.
Mhm. They're a god because they have the cow mind, right?
Yes, because
Yeah.
they are an exception to the rationality of being in the world. So it is a god.
Mhm. That's interesting. Now I'm interested in whether we can account or not whether we can count, and what would happen if we accounted for this idea that it was an exception. Like, what if people being born with cow minds was just like totally normal in this hypothetical world.
Yeah, if this is the same world and that's the only exception, we would worship them as a race of gods. They would be gods. We would definitely worship them. And we would yeah, all human civilization would be based around the worship of these gods. We would have priest castes that represent the will of this god, and this is the nature of society.
Mhm. Well, it sounded like before you said that the reason they would be worshipped as gods is because they were an exception. So, if we say that, people being born in this manner was, like, totally common, then it seems like they're no longer an exception.
Well, no, because you can't actually pick and choose. It's not that it would be an exception because it would be unheard of. It's that it would be an exception that has no other consequences for the rest of being. Like it would not have to account for why cows have cow minds or why humans have human bodies and human minds. It's just this completely. Have you heard of Chris Chan?
Have I heard of what? Oh, Chris Chan? I have heard of
Yeah.
him, I haven't been following the
So
drama, though.
it would be like Sonichu, right? I mean, why is it a combination of Sonic and Pikachu? Well, just for its own sake. And that's why Sonichu is the god of Christian's world. And in the same way, this hypothetical being would be the god of this universe because it is the one exception within it that can justify its existence by virtue only of itself without having any other consequences for the rest of being as a whole.
Mhm. Okay. Well, I'm glad we can at least agree that the cow mind human body person is worthy of moral consideration as well. I think we just tend to fundamentally disagree in how we assign moral value to individuals.
Yeah, I mean, it would be a god. It would actually be a divine being. I mean, I think that is how the divine is defined as
Mhm.
exception to the rationality of being and the world. It is outside of being, but still somehow part of it. So,
Yeah. I think it might challenge that a little bit. Like, let's say someone was born with the mind of like, oh God, what are they called? The things from xenomorphs. Let's say they were born with like the mind of a xenomorph, right? And so they're just like going around tearing other humans up. Um, it's kind of the similar to the cow situation where they were born from a human into like a human society, but their mind was not that of a human.
you
So we
know
have like
that
this. Mhm.
in the movies that xenomorphs are in and Prometheus, there are many indications that the xenomorph was actually worshipped as a god, despite being deadly creature. So it'd be the
Mhm.
same thing. It would be worshipped as a god, a quite deadly god that if it were to come your way would obviously kill you. But assuming it's not going to be able to kill every human being on Earth, it would be worshipped as a god.
Mhm. So okay, so you would still say it's fine to worship them as a god, because like, it's the same criteria,
It's not that it would be fine. Well,
or that we
I would
should, or that it would
no, no, no.
happen.
It's not that it should. I'm saying two things. One, objectively, it would be a god. It would be a god. Two, the consequences of that fact would be that people would worship it as a god. There would be
Mhm.
no other way to relate to it except as a god.
Okay, so that's kind of like that's sort of us speaking descriptively, right? So I'm kind of wondering if, like, prescriptively, you think it would be fine to, like, kill them, though?
Um, would it? I don't know how I would be in a position to decide whether God dies or not.
Well, there's, like, this human body, xenomorph mind individual that's just going around tearing everyone up alive. So, like, if someone came along, they're like, "Hey, like, I have this xenomorph gun. I just gotta shoot him, and he'll be dead, and he won't bother us
I
anymore." Like,
I
would
would
they
be
be okay with
scared.
that?
I would think again, I would have the same existential crisis. I would think, this is a hole in the fabric of being and I couldn't even begin to imagine the consequences. I would not be comfortable killing it because I wouldn't know what it is and what it means for my humanity, my world, not just my humanity, let me be clear, my universe, my being, everything I know that makes sense. Maybe I would have
Mhm.
to submit to it, worship it as a god, because it's a miracle in a sense, right? Think about it. There's something kind of beautiful about this being you just described to me. All things, all things that is within the field of our experience and our reality are at the mercy of some kind of deeper rationality, deeper interconnectedness, right? But this is the one thing that's an exception. Maybe I would see it as a messiah. Maybe I would have to worship it. Maybe I would shed tears at the sublimity of its beauty. Or sorry, that's redundant. I would shed tears in the midst of its sublimity. Um,
Mhm.
it would be my savior, be my God. Have to be.
Okay.
But I mean, to be clear, I think I'm more of a Muslim, so I don't believe this could ever be possible. But
Mhm.
in this world, I would have no choice but to leave Islam and convert to the religion of this being.
Mhm. Okay. Well, I think I've followed all of that, and I do appreciate you, engaging in the hypotheticals with me because I know sometimes, like, when we're like I said before, when we're talking about, like, morality and stuff, we can start getting into, like, really crazy hypotheticals, but I do find them useful. I do think they're useful in helping us flesh out our moral system, so I appreciate that.
Hmm?
I mean, I'm fine with concluding it there, but if you had questions you wanted to ask me, because I've been sort of sitting here pressing you on your position, I'd be fine with that.
Let me think. Uh, yes. So you're a vegan?
Yep.
Yeah. I mean, actually, I'm not.
Yeah.
I don't know what. Yeah, I just
Mhm.
think a lot of people struggle and a difference between. I think in our age, we are losing our humanity, especially with, I mean, internet. Social media has been a huge source of dehumanization. I think veganism is the religion of this new post-human world we're entering. To
Mhm.
me, the forces of humanity must awaken to a new found sense of Eastern humanism, a revival of a kind of forgotten renaissance, one that will allow us to take a path different from European modernity and civilization, the European path that has led us to this complete nihilism and destruction of humanity. So I am hoping for another beginning of humanism and
Okay.
modernity.
Also just to, like, throw the offer, out, you obviously have a concern with, like, humanity and how we treat each other. So if you ever, like, want resources on how animal agriculture affects, humans, like the humans who reside near these factory farms and the humans who work within them, I can always provide you with those if you ever decide you wanna read up on it. That could probably be, like, some sort of middle ground we share, where we both agree that, like, how these industries are treating humans is definitely immoral and shouldn't be happening. So you can always reach out, and if you want those resources, I can offer them.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I would need them. I can see how people work in poor conditions, and obviously there could be problems with land disputes and so on, but I don't see how it's essential to fact. Like I think for other industries it's the same way.
Mhm. Yeah, I would agree. It's not like inherent to the process of animal farming, but I do think that it's an inevitable consequence of the industrialized nature of these industries. Um, so
Yeah,
like maybe
I
yeah.
can agree that modern civilization, which is modern industry, is going to undergo a change, but it's not just going to be a regression to what before. I think industrialization and modernity will have another path. All I can say.
Okay. Well, if you don't have anything else to talk about, we could probably just conclude it there.
Okay, I'll put it there.
Okay. Well, thanks for having me on. I appreciate you setting aside the time to talk to me.
Yep. Bye bye.
All right. See ya.